This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
And welcome to the program. I am Roby Brock, joined by State Senator Jim Hendren. He's the Senate President Pro Tem. Good to see you as always.
Thanks, Roby. It's good to be here.
Thank you for being here. You've been making a little news lately, just a tad, stirring it up a bit there. You are interested in putting a wholesale tax on vaping products in the state of Arkansas and e-cigarettes. Tell me what your strategy is for why you think this is the best solution to approach this vaping epidemic that we've been talking about.
Well, let me be clear, Roby. This is a starting point. Like all legislation, it's especially one where there's only one at a time going through, like we're at this point now. 135 members have an opportunity to weigh in, and I'm certain that they will and have some suggestions for change, but we needed something to begin a framework to build from. This is similar to the method that I used in Senate Bill 571 that we passed through the Senate, and it's really a basic concept of fairness. Right now, nicotine, because it's addictive, because it has a lot of consequences for society and for the taxpayers, it has an excise tax on it. But when the manufacturers started putting the nicotine in vapor products instead of in cigarettes, and the law had not caught up with that, they were exempt from that excise tax. So this basically says we're going to treat all nicotine products the same because they are addictive and because we know there's going to be some costs that come along with that for the taxpayers. But whether it's a wholesale tax, whether it's a retail tax, whether it's percent of nicotine that we tax, all that's going to be fleshed out in future hearings because we want to get it right. But the fundamental concept there is that we shouldn't be giving a break. We shouldn't be subsidizing an addictive product, particularly one that we're finding out more and more every day has such tragic health consequences associated with it.
But you've heard the counter arguments from particularly the businesses that sell vaping and e-cigarette products that they can't afford that type of tax on there, that there wouldn't be something they could pass on to their consumers. It would put them out of business. How do you respond to that?
I don't think the cigarette makers have gone out of business, and this is the same tax that they carry every day. In fact, they're some of the most profitable companies in our country. So it's I agree with Ronald Reagan when he said, if you want more of something, subsidize it, and if you want less, tax it. So right now our policy is subsidizing vaping, and I don't think any of us really believe that's good, particularly with what's going on in our schools. It is, every school administrator has told us it's an epidemic, kids are doing it, parents don't know, it's easier to conceal than cigarettes and traditional tobacco products, and in some ways it's easier to get addicted because the nicotine content is so much more concentrated.
Let's come back to the school children. I want to stay on the adult population here. There are some that have argued that these vaping products and e-cigarette products can help wean them off of their tobacco dependency, their nicotine dependency. Does that register with you?
Well, we heard testimony yesterday from, again, the healthcare professionals, and I'm an engineer and I like to make the decision based on facts rather than talking points from the industry. And what we heard was somebody who quits smoking through traditional methods, either through nicotine patches or through consultation with their doctor, is far less likely to go back to nicotine products at all. Somebody who transitions from cigarettes to vaping as a cessation model never gets off of the nicotine. So what we've done is all we've done is change their addiction from one of cigarettes to one of vaping products. And given the fact that we're finding out now that in some cases these have more severe and more quickly damaging health consequences than traditional tobacco, I don't see that that's a plus, that we're taking people from one method of nicotine delivery to another. We're not taking them off nicotine, we're just changing the delivery method.
There have been some, I guess there have been some instances, some health instances that we've seen where there have been some illegal substances put into some vaping products. It has caused some illnesses and sicknesses and even some potential deaths in a few people right there. Again, the vaping industry says that is not our products doing that. That is somebody putting an illegal substance into our products. Do you agree with that?
Well, there's no question that some of the deaths have been attributed to people using these vaping devices for products that they weren't designed for.
Right.
I don't think it's rocket science to understand, though, that if you give people a device that is much easier to consume flammable products, people are going to use it for that, and not just for the ones that they can buy from the manufacturer themselves. But the problem is we don't know what the long-term consequences are to the manufactured products because we haven't had these devices for long-term. But what we are finding out is there's some short-term consequences that are pretty devastating to the lung, to the pulmonary system, and for us to wait 20 or 30 years like we did about cigarettes, particularly given the fact that an entire generation now is getting addicted to these things. Somewhere between 25 and 50% of high school seniors are doing it or have done it. could be tragic for the health of our future generations. What are we going to do when we find out, yeah, 20 years of use has just the similar effects that cigarettes did? We wish we'd have done something back then. So I don't think we can afford to wait to see what the long-term consequences are, particularly since we know it's damaging in the short term.
Let's talk about some other strategies that may be being discussed right there. You talked about the rise of juuling and vaping among high school students,
right,
particularly. Is where we're seeing a lot of that. I see it in a lot of the circles that my kids run around in as well too. It is a problem at the school level there. Taxing it doesn't necessarily solve the problem though. So what are some other solutions that you hear some discussions about that are going to address that school age problem?
Well, so the bill does a lot more than taxing it. And again, I would say rather than taxing it, I would say it's closing the loophole that they're currently enjoying. But regardless of that, Reagan said it, and the evidence proves it, that the higher cost something is, it's going to result in a decline in use. And the evidence has proven that. As prices go up, youth tend to use the product less. So that's why that is an important component of it. Now, whether that tax revenue is used for school safety, like my draft has it doing, or whether it goes to something else or to tax cuts, that's something the legislature can work through. But the important component of that is it's a deterrent. The other thing the legislation does is it puts the same regulations that we have with regard to where you can smoke on where you can vape, which seems to make sense. And some of us that have been around that realize while it may not smell quite as bad, the fumes and everything are pretty overpowering. So this says where we're going to vape is going to be the same as where you're going to cigarette, and where you can't is going to be the same. It puts it to the provisions of the Indoor Clean Air Act. The other thing it does is it puts some restrictions on manufacturers and vape stores from advertising to youth. Outside of schools, it puts the same 1,000 feet protection that we have for cigarettes and other tobacco products in place for vaping. And it further restricts advertising to youth and minors, which we know through social media and through other methods, there has been a direct targeting of our youth to gain new users, because when you gain a user at 14 or 15, you may have a customer for 60 years that's addicted to your product. So it's important that we stop this effort by the industry to addict new users. So that's some of the other things that are in the legislation.
You've got this in interim study. How long do you think this interim study may last? And you have advocated for a special session potentially before the end of this year. But tell me why that time frame, and do you think there's support for that?
Well, that's just based on how long it normally takes to gather up. If you're going to get the support, you're going to know within a few months. This may take a little bit longer because there's a lot of new evidence coming out, and we do want to make sure that we gather all the data, that we make a wise decisions about how we implement this. There are a lot of considerations about when a special session could be called, but the fact is, the reason I think this rises to the event, I'm not a big fan of special sessions, but there are times to have them. And when every school official is saying, this is an epidemic that is exploding in our schools, every day we wait, we're getting more and more kids addicted to this product. Legislation isn't going to change it overnight, but it's going to begin to make the changes and begin to curb this growing epidemic that we have in our schools. So I'm hoping, because of that urgency that we have to stop a future generation from becoming addicted to nicotine through this new delivery method, we'll get the support and we can take care of it sooner rather than later.
What does Governor Hutchinson think about that? He has to call a special session.
Well, Governor Hutchinson, I've had discussion with him about this. I told him one of the things that I learned from Governor Beebe when I was in the Senate and trying to get a special session called to fix teachers' insurance is there would be no call until there was a list of solid support on both houses and also a strategy to get it out of committee. Because the last thing a governor wants to do is call us into session and end up with us sticking down here arguing for a month or two. So I agree with that strategy, and I think that's what we're looking at, is when I can take the governor a list of 20 or 25 senators and 60 or 70 House members and say we've got the support to get it out of committees. This should be a 3-day endeavor. I hope he'll call the session.
All right, I'm going to pivot a little bit here just because your name has been floated about and there has been some interest expressed in you running for governor in 2022. Are you interested in running for governor in 2022?
I'm interested in dealing with the problems that are on my plate today, which are, right now, as you can see, this is one that I have a lot of concern about. I'm never going to close the door to political decisions, but I'm also not going to make those years in advance. And I mean, we've got another fiscal session, we've got another general session, and then we've got another fiscal session prior to a next governor's coming into office. So it's 3 years away. I am considering it, but I'm not going to make a decision that far in advance. I got too much work to do
You're
today.
also up for re-election in 2020. You'd have to make the decision to run or not run if you wanted to run in 2022 for governor.
Well, it's a 2-year term in 2020, so I am on the ballot this time around, and potentially, so I'm up for election this year. So that's, again, to start worrying about the 2022 decision is pretty premature.
You know that's what we do.
I
Come
understand.
on now.
I understand.
It's what gets us the ratings.
Yeah, right.
Senator Jim Hendren,
Thanks,
thank
Roby.
you for being here. I
Always
appreciate
enjoyed.
it. All right, we're back with more right after this.